Fabula Ultima is full of useful subsystems, or at the very least, it has enough in it to keep it meaningfully flexible. Using just what's in the core book, you can get a lot of mileage out of this game. Today, we're going to look at some of the ways that Fabula Ultima abstracts combat and other challenges. Fabula Ultima is, as one of my friends described, an open toolbox. Its basic rules are simple, and there's a lot of varied subsystems, charts, and examples of how to use all of them. Some of these subsystems were native to Ryutama, the inspiration for Fabula Ultima. But they've otherwise taken on a very different shape as other ideas got introduced and needed to be tweaked to fit better what the game was going for. But also keep in mind, I am on what is mood and theme der Schädel, and it is thus why I hate games with an established setting. Which does not present a problem for me in Fabula, since much of the setting is up to the players and GM. The subsystems exist as a tool for you to fill in your own ideas. Though as soon as I publish this, I'm pretty sure somebody is going to point out that there is a book with an official setting, which, while I may want to ignore it on that ground alone, I'll eventually get a copy and leaf through it. Because as will become very sickeningly apparent to you, I love Fabula Ultima. But I digress. Let's hit the subsystems. Clocks are by and far my favorite of the subsystems in Fabula Ultima. These are, as their name implies, a countdown before something happens, and they were also present in Blades in the Dark before they appeared in Fabula Ultima. And clocks are useful for non-combat encounters, and I've also devised a couple of scenarios they can be used for myself that might actually include combat. And some of what I made may or may not actually be a part of the examples. I don't always read example lists comprehensively. They're very much either a read at your own leisure or on a need-to-know basis for me. You know, like using a dictionary or a thesaurus. Few people ever read those things cover to cover. And the one time I did read a thesaurus cover to cover, I realized that not only was it terrible, it was terrible. Okay, jokes aside, if you're familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse games or some OSR adventures, you're probably familiar with how these work. Ditto Blades in the Dark. If you're not, the rundown is this. When the GM sets a clock, they determine the length of the clock, and think of the length of the clock as how many pieces it can be filled in before the thing happens. And of course, the other part is what happens once the clock is filled. There's ample examples of how this can be used, and they're not mutually exclusive with combat, so you can use them in a fight to make a fight more interesting than mop up the mooks. Plus, some of the sheets for Fabula include a few blank clocks, for your convenience. They're a circle divided up into parts, much like an analog clock. Who would have ever guessed? Travel is one of the pieces of this game that's from the original game Ryutama. It's not kept intact whatsoever from Ryutama, but Fabula Ultima adapts it for the new genre that it was given. Meaning, even if you're familiar with the travel rules from Ryutama, it will not help you with understanding them in Fabula. So let's review how they appear in Fabula. Using the chart on page 106, the GM determines how dangerous the terrain the player characters will be traveling through is. This determines the die used for the travel roll, which is a very simple decision tree. On a 1, some sort of discovery is made, and on a 6 or higher, something dangerous is encountered. This is simple, yet effective, since friendly lands can still have something dangerous lurking around, and the more dangerous a place is, the less likely you are to wander around looking for wonderful things. Possibly. A system like this can be used as a powerful improvisational tool, especially for a GM that doesn't know what step to take next in the plot. But you still need to do something because everyone is gathered around the table looking at you expectantly. If the players are going on a jaunt somewhere, let the dice determine if anything happens. This is basically leaning in on the players will be players idea. The D&D-ism of players being disruptive and never going along with the GM's plans. So, don't have a plan. Put the pieces up in front of them and let them do their thing. That will give you plenty of fresh material to work with. Rituals in Fabula Ultima are a catch-all for any sort of non-combat spell use. Spells for magic classes are typically, how do I make it dead, or some reversal thereof. Even if they don't fall into that bucket, there's still very specific applications of a broader field of magic. It's like understanding chemistry and knowing how to make a battery out of copper coins and table salt. Chemistry is the broad body of knowledge, where if you know it, you can extrapolate from that to figure out how to do the specific application, such as the voltaic pile, a chemical battery that produces a steady electrical current. Meanwhile, you can know absolutely nothing about chemistry, but still know that alternating salty paper and copper coins can create something that you can press copper wire against to create a zappy, tingly feeling when you grab the wires. As a legal disclaimer, do not try that at home. Theoretical explanations aside, let's move on to how it actually works. Every magic class has a skill that grants them access to rituals, meaning they understand the fundamentals of their magic well enough that they can get creative. So, while rituals are open-ended, they do have a few limits placed on them, such as how each magic type has only certain effects that it can cause. Elementalism is the discipline for walking on water, since you're literally telling one of the classical elements, let me walk on you. They also all have a list of effects that, as a matter of course, should not be allowed. Basically, these can be summed up as, you cannot ritual your way into using spells you don't know, or doing things in place of combat abilities. Page 119 has the full process of rituals, with more powerful and complicated effects calling for a higher difficulty roll and more MP. Which this works as a way to counter somebody saying, entropism allows me to manipulate space and time, so I allow myself to walk on the water by creating gravity wells below my feet that don't cause me to sink in the water. I would personally allow that, but it would be a greater potency effect, since that's a much more precise application of what the entropism allows, and thus it's easier to really mess up. Oh, you failed your roll? Well, the gravity well instead sends you up to the ceiling, at high velocity. You don't die, but the sudden stop really hurts, and now you suddenly have to worry about the return trip to the floor. Projects are the purview of the Tinkerer class. Simply having a level in Tinkerer allows you to start working on big, fanciful inventions. The outline for how this starts is on page 134, and the basic idea is you pitch the GM what you want to create, and using some charts on the next page, the GM will determine how much it's going to cost. And you need that money up front to get the materials, with more complex inventions possibly needing some other special item or material, meaning another quest you might need to embark on. Then, for every 100 zenith the project costs, you need 1 progress point to build it. Progress points are only gained when you spend a day working on the invention, and you gain 1 progress point for every player character that's working on it, and an additional 1 point for every one of them that has at least 1 level in Tinkerer. And the inventions created through the project system are one of a kind. If they break, you need to start making a new one from scratch. Let's follow this up with an example. Creating an encyclopedia of magic that records information on spells and can later be used to analyze magical phenomenon. I would classify this as an extreme potency effect. It's a thing that gathers and synthesizes information, a hallmark of intelligence. Arguably major if it's limited to just working with magical phenomenon, but I'm going to err on the side of caution and say extreme. In either case, there's some special material you're going to need before you can start working on this encyclopedia. If it's the size of, say, a handheld scanner, we could classify this area as individual. You need to physically bring the scanner to the specific phenomenon, and it can only scan the immediate area. Kind of like having another person looking around. But if we wanted it to be a massive station that could scan an entire country, you might want to classify that one as huge. And lastly, a device like this working only once would just be silly. So let's say it has a permanent effect. 800 times 5 would be 4,000 zenith, and that's the amount we need to pay up front. And we'd also need a special material to find before we can start working on it. That is, of course, if we wanted it to be the hand scanner. If you want the massive station, it's 800 times 4 times 5 for a total of 16,000 zenit. The hand scanner would take 40 progress points to make, and the full facility would need 160. Thus, if you're the only tinkerer in the party and no one is willing to help you, it'll take 20 days to make that scanner, and about 3 months to make the facility. On a different note though, here's an idea for a campaign. A bunch of insane inventors dealing with the repercussions of their inventions getting stolen or going haywire. Fabula Ultima opts to use the word conflict instead of combat, and for good reason I'd say. It has the requisite steps of who is involved in this kerfluffle right now, followed by, okay, roll for initiative. Basically, anytime it becomes important to slow down time because of a lot of shenanigans about to happen, it's a conflict. And it may or may not involve the breaking of bones and shedding of blood. It could involve a heated argument and trying not to say the wrong thing while you're standing in front of the magistrate. Or it could involve being in a dark cave looking for rock and stone. Either way, it's a situation where individual actions are happening and being resolved one step at a time. Starting with figuring out turn order, it's a group check of dexterity and insight, made by the player characters against a static value representing the opposition. If the player characters beat their opposition in the check, one person on their side goes first. Otherwise, somebody from the opposition goes first. This alternates. After the PC side has a character that acts, the opposition gets a character that acts. And who acts is up to the side that has initiative. That is, the players can argue amongst themselves about who they want to go first. And if one side runs out of people who have acted, then the side with more characters just has all theirs take their turns until absolutely everybody involved has acted. Some of the quirks of a system like this provides are thus. The side with the fastest character can then have their slowest character move before everyone else. Plus, being outnumbered means you'll take a beating from several enemies acting one after another towards the end of the round. And for that reason, multiple actions are more of an enemy side thing. And instead of getting all their actions at once, they'll alternate along with the players, using only one of those at a time. That said, let's move into some of the more combat-specific considerations. There's a detailed list of various conflict actions on page 67. These are all the major staples that anybody could need in a make the thing dead scenario. Messing around with equipment, physically harming a foe, and also doing things to foil an enemy's goals, such as guarding against attacks or inflicting status ailments on them. These are all things you have by default, by the way. Your class skills are just more effective methods of doing these things. And distance is not a major consideration in Fabula Ultima. Don't worry about it too much. This is a bit of a controversial take, but I think it might be for the better, since having maps present and trying to get positioning and all that just right to hit all the enemies but not your allies is one of those things that just starts entirely too many arguments in tabletop role-playing games. If you're worried about your squishier characters getting trounced easily, you have options besides worrying about distance and positioning. Consider the guard maneuver. It can be used to prevent melee attacks against another target, as well as to give them resistance to all damage types until they act again. Another quirk worth noting about Fabula Ultima, attacks have a relatively consistent amount of damage they will deal. Most weapons have a static number that is greater than any dice rolls you'll make while you're attacking with them, and they also add the highest face from your dice when you're attacking to the damage. And speaking of equipment, the equipment list is kind of short, but it's meant to encapsulate a variety of weapons, as opposed to being a comprehensive list of every weapon ever. If you'll think back to some of the earlier editions of D&D, there's 20 different versions of it's a stick with something sharp at the end. But I digress. If you're some kind of Westaboo that hates everything that isn't medieval Europe, you're welcome to say then the katana is, I don't know, an Estoc or something. This is honestly one of the ways that Fabula is closer to the likes of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition than Final Fantasy. There's not much progression in terms of equipment. A sword is a sword is a sword, and forevermore shall be. However, there is a subsystem for creating more unique weapons on page 268. Basically, it's a list of a few tweaks you can make to a weapon that also increases the cost of it. Ultimately, the GM has the final say as to whether or not these rare items can be bought easily or not. Which if you decide something like different factions have different weapons they excel at making with better qualities than a basic version of that weapon, this subsystem works wonderfully for that. Such as, if you want a kingdom that specializes in firearms, you can take various ranged weapons, add some qualities to them, and say that in addition to the higher cost, you can only find them in that kingdom. Or if you have an illicit contact with people who can get such weapons out of the kingdom. There is a short but robust bestiary in the back of Fabula Ultima, and there is a several pages long chapter detailing various abilities and skills suitable for NPCs. This is by far the longest of Fabula's subsystems, and it starts on page 302. And it works very similar to creating a player character, oddly enough. The end results do naturally look a little different, though. Non-player characters will have less skills than player characters. Their attribute dice can be distributed a little bit differently, and they'll have some special traits and abilities that don't count as skills. Most importantly, NPCs created this way most likely exist just for players to beat up or otherwise trounce in some way, so you don't need to know every single thing that they're capable of. Just the things they'll do when the chips are down, the gloves are off, and fists and feet start flying, or pointed words start getting thrown around. Another thing worth mentioning, Fabula Ultima's system for balancing encounters typically comes down to you just kind of have to eyeball it and use your best judgment, which is an approach I can't really fault anybody for coming down to. Balancing encounters is, and always has been, just that. Something to be taken on a case-by-case basis as opposed to following a list of steps to get specified results. That said, Fabula has no shortage of guidelines, tips, and tricks for designing encounters, all throughout the very cleverly named Designing Encounters section, starting on page 292. These are the things that I am not going to reiterate, though, because it was said perfectly the first time, and all of it is just too good to be distilled down to a few spoken lines. Plus, I have to leave some reason for people to buy the book themselves if they haven't yet, and these things I'm not saying here are the really good and insightful stuff that you should get the book for, especially if you're a GM. As I said in the basics video, there's no one thing that makes Fabula Ultima a great game. It's like my friend said, an open toolbox of different subsystems that you can pick and choose pieces from. And you aren't by any means required to use all the subsystems. And deciding not to use a particular subsystem can have just as big of an impact as deciding how you use it if you include it. So if, as a new GM, you find all the tools in Fabula Ultima daunting, don't sweat trying to include everything. If you're playing with folks who are more accustomed to the classic formula of a dungeon crawl shenanigans, where you go into a dungeon, butcher monsters, and take all their things, you can stick to that for an adventure or two until you get the hang of the basics. Then, maybe break out the travel rules when the players are making their way back home. Or if you don't want them to make it home safely, but they have a bunch of money to play around with, start looking into projects to give them a place to sink their newfound fortune. Here's your end of video math problem. You have two clocks, a 4-count clock and a 6-count clock. They each advance by 1 at the end of every turn. They reset back to 0 when they max out, and then start counting again. If they both start at 0, how many turns will pass before they both are at 0 again, at the same time? Leave your answer in the comments below. Thanks for watching, I am Aaron Del Schädel, and I will see you all next time.